Goldman Sachs says if masks were mandatory across the United States, it could help the economy avoid a 5% hit to GDP. A study done by the company found that masks would prevent infections and further lockdowns. For more, let's bring in Marvin Ryder. He's a professor with the McMaster University DeGroote School of Business. Good to have you on this.
Glad
So
to be with you.
you've read the report, the Goldman Sachs report. What do you make of this?
Well, I'd probably phrase it a little differently. What Goldman Sachs is trying to say to people is there is a cost for not getting coronavirus under control. In Canada, we saw in March our economy shrink by 7%, in April 11%, and that's because we went into a total lockdown. The United States never got as far deep into a lockdown as we did, and then almost immediately began to reopen. You remember the armed people in Michigan demanding that we go back at this. And so what they're trying to warn you about is if you don't get this under control, there are severe consequences because there's only one choice left, and that would be a severe lockdown. So what they're trying to do in this study, I think, is show Americans that if you give up a little civil liberty, that means wear a mask, you can save the economy at least 5%. And I would think it would even be higher than that if it has to go back into a lockdown mode. So it's a cost-benefit trade-off, hoping that would resonate with people in a way that maybe just health officials are not getting.
And Marvin, we've even seen here, I mean, well, certainly in Toronto, day one of the mandatory mask in public indoor spaces, we've seen a number of people who are fighting back against feeling like they're losing their civil rights. So what are the political and I'll just take it to the state side right now. What are the political challenges of making masks mandatory?
Well, a key difference between Canada and the United States is our political leadership. I have been very impressed with Justin Trudeau and Doug Ford and all the premiers in Canada. They've been very nonpartisan in their approach. They work weekly and they work together as a team and they present a unified front. The United States is not like that. Donald Trump says one thing one day and then acts a different way on a different day. Different governors in different states have different things. And so there's no unified approach at the top. And that is so critical during a pandemic or any kind of a national emergency. It isn't simply that I tell you the right things, but I model them in my behavior on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not seeing that in the United States. And that's why I'm fearful that not only are they not going to get this under control, but that the situation will get even worse. And then they may have to impose even more dramatic things. And for Donald Trump, with an election looming in November, if those things have to happen in September or October, doesn't bode well. I would think it would make sense to him to do the most difficult things now to free it up for November.
Well, we certainly know he wants to be able to tout a good economy in this election year. So when those numbers come out and they attach a specific number, a 5%, in terms of GDP, does that put some more pressure on the White House or for Trump to change his mind on masks?
Yeah, well, I would say I'd like to think so, but this is a president who does not respond well to studies and projections and different kinds of academic work that way. In fact, in the United States, you can almost find a study that says something different than the study previously. And unfortunately, some of the early studies around coronavirus perhaps did over-predict or overstate the kind of impact it was going to have. And thus, many people say, well, you see, they said it was going to be this big and it wasn't that big. Therefore, I don't believe all studies. That's one of the problems with this coming out today from Goldman Sachs. But I'm hoping that there are other people who can realize that this does make some sense. A little compromise here means we can keep the economy going. In fact, Beverly, I can even say this. I think in hindsight, now that we know what we know about coronavirus, maybe Canada never really had to lock down quite the way it did. If we'd gone for mandatory quarantine, social distancing, and masks back in March and April, maybe we wouldn't have had to lock down to the extent we did. It was the right thing then because we didn't know, but hopefully we're smarter as we go forward. And so even to look at this study from Goldman Sachs as a warning for a second wave, what the impacts would be. We're not done with this yet.
No, we sure aren't. Okay, Marvin Ryder, thank you very much for joining us.